Benjamin, well, welcome. What I'm interested in is actually the art of poetry. What makes a jumble of words into a poem?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I've listened to academics talking about this for ages, and nobody really knows. What is a poem? I mean, it's just a few words put together in a particular way that have a particular effect on people. And sometimes it can be the most simplest words. Sometimes you can take something really small and write an epic poem about it. Sometimes you can take some really big issues and just sum it up in a couple of lines. And a good poet knows a great poet when you look at that poem and go, why the fuck didn't I say that? Why didn't I do that? You know, it's so simple. I mean, I've been banging on for years about poetry not being elitist and giving it back to the people and all that stuff. And then a friend of mine who's no longer with us, Adrian Mitchell, he wrote a poem. It just says, it's simple. It says, most people ignore most poetry because most poetry ignores most people. And I go, wow.
I'm just thinking, why didn't I think of that
already? You know? So it's really difficult to say. There's been, just recently, there's been a very heated debate in the media, in some media, and in some circles of poets. And what happened was, I don't want to call names, but one woman attacked a lot of other women, and they happened to be performance poets, and said that it's all rubbish. And I kind of read the article, and I just thought, you know, we had this in the 80s with Swells and Attila the Stockbroker and John Cooper Clarke, you know, Linda Gurdy Johnson, academics saying it's not real poetry. There's almost a kind of jealousy because a lot of poets, they write poetry and they're happy if 100 people read it. When they see us filling dance halls with people, they go, how the hell are they doing that kind of thing? And so, you know, in this article, this particular article, the woman was kind of comparing popular poets to popularism and Trump. You know, I mean, so some of us, me included, were a bit outraged by it. Poetry had always been for the people, it's always been with the people. A lot of people think poetry, well, certainly oral poetry, performance poetry, is part of this oral tradition. A lot of people think of it as an Asian, African, Caribbean thing. But actually, Britain, Europe had a strong oral tradition a long time ago. Homer and Beowulf and all that kind of stuff was to be created, not really written, created to be spoken. Back in the days when most English people didn't read and write, things were passed on orally. Things were passed on through poetry that was memorised. And you can still see remnants of it in Scotland and especially in Ireland and Wales. In England, it's kind of died out to a certain degree. But you know, what happened was in the 15th century, a great thing was invented. It's a great thing called the printing press. And then people started to put poetry into the bookshelf. And then, of course, it was the elite that kind of had access to the printing press, and they were educated, and they would show off their education in their poetry and put the book on the bookshelf and say, you can only access this if you have the education we have, if you can read the codes that we devise. And they took poetry from the people.
Started editing the culture on their own terms.
Yes, yeah, and yeah, calling it high culture and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it's been done with music, it's been done with lots of things. So, you know, you can ask 100 people what poetry means or what poetry is, and they can give you 100 different replies. But
good, that's the way it should be.
That's the way it should be. You know, it's just words, and we're using them all the time. And I'm convinced that, you know, at the dawn of woman and mankind, we would speak and tell each other facts that happened, and then we started to embellish it, and then we started to talk about the angels, and then I started to chat you up because I wanted to have sex with you or whatever. And poetry was invented a long time ago, before the drum even, and before flutes. You know, I think it was the first art form. I'm convinced of that.
So it's actually doing two things at once there. It's one, it's compressing the complex into the simple, but it's also making the simple into the complex and adding on the 100 angels.
Yes, I mean, it's only when we start to analyse it, and sometimes we begin to over-analyse it. But if you think about what people say about a beautiful footballer, you know, a great piece of play, and you go, that's poetry. There's something about it. Suddenly you can't describe it. You don't want to say it's left and right and then they dribble. Oh, that's just sublime. That's just beautiful, you know. And that's where it comes from. You put some words together and you go, oh, you know. There's a tradition in Pakistan of something called mashairas, where the poet stands in the centre and performs poetry. And sometimes the audience will shout, the baraka here, that means do it again. And you can do a line of poetry and they'll go, do it again and do it again. And sometimes the whole poem, just do it again. I did one once, and like I performed one poem about 10 times because I loved it so much. In England, they'd ask for their money back, you know what I mean? But it's because they just love to hear it. Those words, please, one more time. It's difficult to describe, you know. When you one of my favourite poems is "Do Not Go Gentle" by Dylan Thomas, and every time I read it, there's a couple of versions of me reading it on YouTube, but every time I just read it on the page, I go, how did he put that together? He's pleading to his dead father to not go gentle, to put up a fight, please. You know, you can overcome this. And then I'm not sure how long later, I think it's a few months, he's dead himself. You know, the writer's dead.
So it's really emotive.
Ah, yeah. You know, and if you ask me to write an essay analysing that, one of my favourite poems of all time, I'd be faking it. You know, it's a bit like meditation. I don't know if you meditate at all, but when you start talking about it, you just sound like you're doing mumbo jumbo. You've got to experience it. You've got to feel it. You know, fuck the intellectualism. You've really just got to experience it.
So after you started doing poetry when you're very young, do you actually study poetry and read other poets afterwards? You know, like look at how poems constructed and all different types of poetry. You know, from street poetry to the so-called highbrow heavyweight stuff. Have you looked at it all and seen the rhyme and the meter and the way it all works?
Not originally, no. I mean,
no, but as you've gone on through the years.
Yes. No, when I started doing poetry, well, poetry in the broadest terms, I started on the sound systems, toasting. I was creating poetry in the playground, but that was just to get a kiss from a girl. You know, I used to go to a girl, say, what's your name, and make up a poem, and just get a kiss. Or a sweet. So I used to call it playing with words. Then I started toasting. For anybody that's kind of watching this that doesn't know what toasting is, it's kind of Jamaican rap, before rap. I, Rai, you, Rai, Big Youth, that kind of stuff.
Total genius.
Yeah, I love that stuff.
Big Youth, what a voice.
My hero.
Yeah.
It's interesting, a lot of people listen to me and they may say the content of my stuff is kind of influenced by Bob Marley and politics and everything else. But actually, I think my style, if anything, is very close. Well, I shouldn't say very close because he may beat me up, but highly influenced by Big Youth. You know, he was my number one. He
has the biblical thunder, I always think.
Yeah. He can take something from the Bible and take something from now and talk about the way police just beat him up and just mix it all up together.
Was he just a security guard in the studio? They just got him in on a track, didn't they, or something?
I didn't know that. No.
I don't think he was. I don't think he was meaning to have that kind of career.
Right? What? Yeah. But anyway, so I'm listening to these guys, well, doing something similar to that, and I made a name for myself in Handsworth because a lot of them would talk about what was going on in Jamaica, and I found it a little bit fake. It's a little bit like when hip hop kind of took off, and a lot of British cats were kind of mimicking the Americans, and then you got Rodney P come out and just did it in Cockney. Well, I listened to the reggae music and kind of did my toasting, but I would talk about what happened in Handsworth. And then it kind of got political because the National Front started coming for us, and they would come to our dances and stuff like that, and then I would kind of be toasting about that. And every now and again, in between the tracks, I would do a bit of poetry. I'd basically keep talking. And I can remember one day somebody said to me, remember, this is a purely black scene Yeah. There were a couple of white kids, but you'd have to be really trusted, you know what I mean? Because they used to bring plainclothes police in and all that stuff. So, you know what I mean? If he's a white cat, you had to really have a good friend. And then once he's all right, you know, he's with me, he's cool, you know, it's all right, you know. And so somebody said to me, I'll never forget it, somebody said, you know, your stuff, white people would enjoy that too. White people can get off on that. And I was like, you shouldn't want to hear this stuff, you know what I mean? Because like it's all against slavery and against racism and all that stuff. And when you live in a little cocoon like that, you can think everybody out there, all the white people out there, don't like you, you know, because we're in a community which is very Caribbean. And most of the white people we see are basically police back then. You know what I mean?
Because Handsworth was the biggest West Indian area of Britain, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah, at the time, yeah. You know, and every now and again you'd be on the street and a guy would come up to you, a white guy, and he'd say, yeah. And you'd look at his shoes and you can see, you know, he's a policeman. Because he's trying to dress that.
Shiny
and he's got shiny shoes.
Yeah.
And then he'd go, have you got any reefer? And he'd go, reefer with a bloke like that type of reefer. He just read a textbook or something, how to speak Jamaican, and completely out of date. But yeah, then I said, right, okay, let me just test this. And I went to a community centre and just did it as poetry. And people loved it, you know. And then I remember I used to have a girlfriend. I think I can call her a girlfriend. Well, yeah, sorry, I'm having a flashback now because she was lots of our girlfriends. We kind of shared. Yeah. And there's a band in Birmingham called Fashion. Ever heard of them?
Yeah, I remember Fashion.
Yeah, right. And this girl was kind of. We all used to kind of hang around together, and there was this guy that had. I cannot remember his name, but he lived in a kind. I'm sure it was a squad, but when you walked in the house, it was just like all the wallpaper was just New Musical Express and sounds. You know, he decorated the whole house with that, so you could literally walk in and just start reading about, you know, bands that were big at the time, and you know, and he would just in his room it was empty, and he just had this great sound system, and he would just play records, and then he would stop, and play and put the radio on and listen to John Peel. And I remember one day he played me a track by Patrick Fitzgerald. And it was about how tough it is being white and living on a council estate. And at the end of the track, he goes, what have we got left? We ain't got anything except reggae. And I went, those white cats like reggae. You know? I remember like going, white people like it too, you know. And it made me go, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to London.
Because you saw there was a connection.
Yeah. And I heard about the punk thing and stuff, and it wasn't really taken off in Birmingham. There was a club called Killing Time. And I remember this guy took me there, this black guy took me there, and I was a little bit scared. He was like, no, these white kids are cool. You know, these white kids are cool. And I think he was selling weed, but, you know. But I went there, and I just remember feeling great. And, of course, they would play some punk, and then they'd stop and play reggae, and I go, wow. You know, this is amazing, you know. And it was difficult for me at the time because I was kind of living a kind of slightly unlawful life, you know, doing things that were kind of illegal to earn money.
Because you got in trouble, didn't you?
Couldn't get a job. I was in and out of prison and all that kind of stuff. But it stayed with me. It stayed with me. And then one day I just went, I'm giving all this stuff up and I'm going to London.
Was that an attempt to get away from getting into trouble as well?
Yes.
Or do you see London as a place that had opportunity? Or do you feel there's no scene really in Birmingham?
I felt the scene was kind of too small in Birmingham, small to no scene. And actually it was just a couple of clubs. And on the whole, they tended to be white clubs and black clubs. And I saw this thing going on in London that was very much more mixed, you know. And Steel Pulse, they came from my side of town, and I knew them.
They're older than you, weren't they?
No, we were around the same age.
Well, same age. Were they really, I don't know, they were that young.
Yeah, I think me and David were more or less.
Yeah.
I think we're just a few months between us.
The best, for me, I would say the greatest British reggae band.
I think one of the best reggae bands in the world.
Amazing bands.
I think, yeah. And I don't say that because they're from Birmingham. I mean, just the way they really craft the song and everything, you know, I just think they're brilliant.
Just the groove, they have this really heavy
Yeah,
groove about
yeah.
them as well.
And they were playing down in London, and I saw some footage and stuff, and they were telling me about the kind of mixed audiences they were playing to. And I was like, yeah, that's where I got to go. And so it was kind of getting out of the lifestyle I was in Birmingham, wanting to kind of meet similar minds, people that were kind of into poetry and art and music and whatever. Yeah, and the police were after me.
So let's spell it up a little bit.
The police were after me. They were actually after me for a murder.
Were they?
Seriously.
Well,
I don't know if you know, my autobiography is coming out in May, so I write about this a lot. They were after me for a murder, and I didn't do it, obviously. What it was, there was a body in the boot of a car that I was robbing,
Okay.
and my fingerprints were all over the car.
Yeah.
And I came down to London, and suddenly I was on television, and Channel 4 just came in. And I used to do a lot of live stuff on Channel 4. And I'd do the programme, and I think the police are watching it, and then I'd come out the studio and run like crazy, you know what I mean? I thought, I got away with it then, and then they booked me again. I go, oh, can I do this? And in the end, I just went to Birmingham, gave myself up, and they said, oh, we know it's not you. You know,
Yeah.
We found a real culprit. But
So what was the industry like in London when you got here? Was it the streets paved with gold, or was it?
No,
or did you have
no,
some
no.
connections that made things happen for you?
At first, it was difficult because I didn't really know anybody in the music scene, the art scene at all, and I was just staying with a friend in Peckham, New Cross, and going to sound system dances again. But I met a couple of people, two people in particular, one woman and one guy, who one of them introduced me to Peter Tosh. Literally one day she said, oh, I'm going down the road, do you want to come with me? I'm going to meet Peter Tosh. Like, Peter
Wow.
Tosh.
Yeah.
Peter Tosh, you know what I mean?
Definitely not Handsworth now.
Yeah. And I was like, yes. And I went and met Peter Tosh, and we just got on so well. And for absolutely no reason at all, he just went to me, what are you doing for the next couple of weeks? And I went, nothing. He went, come on tour with me. And I just toured with him around Britain, and he just gave me a hotel room next to him. And I was like, do you want me to work or what? And he's like, no, just hang out with me. You know what I mean?
What reason do you think that was? Do you think he saw something
liked my
in you?
poetry.
Yeah.
And he knew that I'd written to Bob Marley when I was young. I'd written to Bob Marley, and Bob Marley wrote me a letter back. And I told him about it, and he went, yeah, man, the poet, you know, yeah. And so, so that really helped me when it come to the music scene. Because, you know, you're a friend of Peter Tosh's.
There's a lot of doors open.
Yeah. And then on the other side, I started doing a couple of gigs not too far from here in East London. And they were in like community centres, and it's East London University now, but it used to be called NELP, North East London Polytechnic. And I remember a guy came there and he spotted me. And he was instrumental in, well, quite instrumental in bringing people like Alexis Sale and Dawn French. Well, he started a thing called Alternative Cabaret. Roland McDoon, do you know him?
Another name, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And he also, he was the guy that got the Hackney Empire when it was just a bingo hall, just doing nothing, and made it back into a theatre. Great guy. Real kind of left-wing campaigning guy. And do you know Reg Saunders?
Yeah.
And they were all friends and stuff, and they were like, we've got this thing, we want to do a thing called New Variety. So, you know, we can have a singer, we can have a comedian. There's a group called Frank Chicken, I don't know if you remember them.
Yeah, I remember them,
So many great names. And the idea was you didn't know what was happening next, just like the old Variety vaudeville stuff. So you could get a juggler, then you
like
get
turns. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And so that was happening alongside the kind of reggae scene. That's why my first single was called Dub Rantin, because I was doing dub poetry, and then you started to get Stephen Wells or Swells, Attila the Stockbroker, John Cooper Clarke, Porky the Poet, all that kind of stuff was happening. And then you had the dub poetry. You had Linton Kwesi Johnson, Oko Nora, Jean Breeze. And I was in both camps. So my first single was called Dub Rantin, because the white guys call themselves ranting poets, and we call ourselves dub poets. But I kind of ranted dub, you know. So
Which is actually quite interesting what you're doing it, because you are taking from both,
Yes.
making your own, aren't you? So
Yes.
there's something very Jamaican about what you do.
Yeah.
But there's also something really quintessentially English about what you do as well.
yeah, well spotted. Because a lot of the time, a lot of the Jamaican people were saying, "Can you be a bit more Jamaican?" I go, "No, you know, come from Birmingham." But you know, we spoke Jamaican in Birmingham, but it depended on who we were talking to. You know.
Did you feel both, or is this like a new generation, you know, the first generation that came in the early 60s were very Jamaican, weren't they?
Yeah.
And you're the second generation, the ones who are born to those people. So
Yeah.
you've got those English influences, haven't you?
Yes, of course.
So was this a way to come to terms with this? You know, for good or bad as well?
Yeah, in a way. I mean, the poetry and expressing the poetry that wasn't strictly Jamaican or particularly English, but both, you could recognise both in it, it was just natural to me. You know, it wasn't faked, it wasn't phony. If I went on and just tried to sound Jamaican, it would be completely fake. And if I went on and just sounded Brummie, it would be completely fake as well. I mean, we talk Jamaican with a bit of Brummie in it. And I remember hearing some of the white people from Birmingham speak Brummie, and I go, "Oh, that's really strong." You know what I mean? I remember coming down to London when I heard black people sounding Cockney. I was like, to be honest, I kind of laughed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But they laughed.
You just never heard that.
Yeah, I'd never heard it.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? But they laughed at me. Yeah. I remember many years afterwards, me and Swells actually, we were doing a gig at the Edinburgh Festival. And there was this white guy in the audience who we kind of went out with for a drink afterwards. And he was Scottish, but he was completely into reggae music and everything. And I'm terrible at doing accents. But when he met me, he was like, "Irie Rasta man." It's this Jamaican Scottish thing. "Man, like the roots reggae, aya." You know? He was great. And he had this kind of reggae club in Scotland. He was flying the flag for reggae, you know. That's what we are. You know, I don't want to get heavily political, but I do. You know, people bang on about multiculturalism, and there's almost like a backlash against it now, and saying we've all got to kind of find an idea of Britishness and all that kind of stuff. It's all bullshit. Britain has always been multicultural, always. The Angles and the Saxons and the Celts and the Juts are all different cultures that came here. And now, you know, there's the Jamaicans and the Haitians and the Middle Eastern and whatever. It's the one thing, well, not the one thing, but it's one of the most important things that we've done well for thousands of years. You know, we've always been this mongrel race. The problem with multiculturalism is that people's perceptions of it. So when something goes wrong, they go, "Oh, multiculturalism, this is the problem." But actually, we do it really well. It's kind of something that ticks over in the background, and you don't notice it. You don't notice it. You know, I remember I got my band together a few years ago, and it's a reggae band, so I got my bass and drums. You got to get that tight, and then I got a guitarist, and he was an Indian guy, and he could really hold that reggae rhythm. And I said, like, "Can you play a lead?" And his lead sounded like it was really Indian, basically, on the guitar.
Yeah.
He was like playing the sitar style on the guitar, you know, and it was just so beautiful. And we all went, yeah, you know, and it just happens naturally, you know, and that's why we're so good at music. You know, if you look at this little place, because Britain's quite small, really, and our cultural influence around the world is so strong because we innovate kind of naturally, really. I mean, even the Beatles will tell you that, you know, being near the docks,
playing black music.
You listen to black music, yeah, getting the
boats.
records from the ships and everything, you know.
But you're part of this process. And do you think, you know, you say you've grown up in Handsworth and it felt closed in. Do you think no matter what people say, it has actually got better, hasn't it, since those days?
Yeah, well,
I mean, obviously there's problems, isn't there? But, you know, it's, for the next generation along, it's much more mixed, especially in cities, isn't it?
There are places in Birmingham that I couldn't go when I was a kid. There are places, when I came to London, 78, there are places around here which you couldn't go with the black people. Canning Town was a no-go area, even though you crossed the A13 and you went into a place that looked partly like India and Jamaica. I remember I tried to get a taxi driver to take me to Canning Town once, just because I'd heard about it. And he went, I'm not doing it. He said, and I said to him, don't feel sorry for me. I'll take care of myself. He said, I'm not worried about you. What they'll do to me for bringing you in, really dangerous place. And so it's kind of hard for a lot of people to imagine now. I remember when we used to leave dances sometimes, the National Front would be waiting outside. There's a poem in my first book, Pen Rhythm. It's called Call It What You Like, because I didn't even bother thinking of a title. But it's about being in this reggae dance and the National Front coming in. And they brought loads of people to like smash up this dance and beat us up. And when a dance is just getting going and there's not enough people in there, so they completely outnumbered us. And there were kids there and they were smashing them and stuff like that. You tell that to the generation of kids coming up now and they can't imagine it, gangs of skinheads, and I say racist skinheads because I had skinhead friends that were scar skinheads, they were good guys. But just groups of skinheads walking down the street looking for black people to beat them up. And cops that would protect them, that made it worse, you know what I mean? So things have changed, of course things have changed. There's still racist cops and there's still racist people. They've just got to be a lot more sophisticated now, if I can use that word. Yeah, they've got to be a bit more clever with their racism.
So were you politicised when you moved to London, or were you politicised? Because in Birmingham you get into trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there's a political backdrop already, or maybe you were just like a wild kid, but when you got to London, you put your energy into poetry, but also your energy into idealism and politics as well. I mean, or was it were the people surround you with good ideas that sort of clicked with you?
Why I made my name in Birmingham on the toasting scene was because I would listen to the radio and the television and hear about Martin Luther King and hear about what was going on in South Africa. The big war at the time was the Biafran War, although that was a kind of black-on-black war. But and even the Vietnam War, I remember kind of hearing about that, and so I'd kind of get little bits of it, and I would kind of understand the right and wrong a bit and put that into my poetry. And that's why a lot of people said I was kind of ahead of my years when it comes to my knowledge of world politics. Looking back, it wasn't a great knowledge, but I cared, and so I'd do a little bit of research. But I think my first political act was going into school. Would you remember Angela Davis?
Yeah.
Right, you remember the Free Angela Davis campaign, the fist and the afro and everything. And I went into school and I had like a picture of a drawing of Angela Davis. It just used to be the afro, and we'd know that's Angela Davis. And I'm here, the black power fist there. And the teacher told me to get rid of them, to take them off.
Wow.
In front of the class. So I just pulled my trousers down. And the boys in the school, it was really funny. So I didn't mean take them off like that, get rid of them. I said, no, my hero. And I got kicked out of school. And my mum got a little bit upset. She didn't quite understand why I was making a stand about it. And I didn't understand it all. I just knew she was a strong black woman freedom fighter. America's Most Wanted, and she escaped from jail. And I was like, what, And I was only a kid. So I was kind of aware. It was when I came down to London, really. I mean, in Birmingham, as I said, the National Front were there, and I understood the politics of the police not liking me and some white people not wanting me in their country and all that kind of stuff. But I was really lucky. I came to East London in Stratford, and there was like an alternative bookshop that wanted to publish me. And I started to read and talk to these people. And they were like, just every kind of minority in this little place. And it wasn't tokenism, it was people that cared about these.
Just there anyway.
They were just there. Yeah. And so for me, it was like going to university, It was like, because if I had a question, they would answer it. And some of them, were, I was going to say quite extreme, but I could understand where they were coming from. I remember once, I think Lionel Richie used to have a song, Once, Twice, Three Times a Lady, and I was singing it, and this one said, no, once a lady is enough. You know what I mean? To get a lecture on why you shouldn't be once, twice, three times a lady.
So there's some sternness there as well.
Yeah, but it really kind of helped me. you know, and it really kind of educated me in politics. And
But you were bringing stuff in as well, weren't you?
yes, yeah, because they didn't know about my experience. And there wasn't a lot written about the kind of experience of black people in Britain. And sometimes, you know, I'd turn up at the shop beaten up, you know, so I'd tell them the story and write it down in poetry or whatever. So there's an old Rasta saying, I don't know if it's just Rasta or whatever, but we always say each one teach one. You know, we learn from each other.
I mean, talk about Rasta. I mean, is that something that's really ingrained in you, the Rasta ideology? There's such a lot of different versions of it,
Yes,
isn't there?
yeah.
So what's your take on the Rasta?
Yeah, well, you know, people who look at Rasta from the outside always find it very difficult to pin down. The Roman Catholic Church once did a survey or study into Rastafarianism, and they put a lot of money into academics and people trying to work it out. And they came away and just threw their hands up and said, we can't understand it, you know. They got no leader.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's no one church. You've got some people who are extremely religious in the Rastafarian movement. You got some that are not. You got some that are more kind of left-wing. They're more kind of socialist. I guess I kind of go to that side. You've got some that, you know, drink. You got some that are vegans. You got some that are not. And the interesting thing, no Rasta can look at the other one and say, you're not a Rasta for doing that. It's kind of like Buddhism in a way. It says you do what you have to, what's good for you. You will answer to it with your own conscience in the end. Ideally, if you can live without eating meat, you should do, because it's living without killing. But if you can't, then you have to justify that kind of thing. You got Rastas who kind of really love the gold and stuff like that, and then you got Rastas like me that think, you know, it's all exploitation gold. It's, you know. So, you know, I've been asked this question hundreds of times. I've talked to loads of academics all over the world. I've thought about it a lot, and I've come to the conclusion that there's only three things that hold Rastas together, that makes us say that we are Rastas. One, which is kind of obvious now, but at the time, in the early days of the movement, people questioned it. But one is that we all come from Africa. Africa is our home, yeah? And Ethiopia is the best representation of that because it's unconquered, yeah? Two, Haile Selassie. A lot of people have a problem with Haile Selassie. Some people have a problem with his politics and all that kind of stuff. But we know that he's a direct descendant of Solomon. He's directly linked to the family of Solomon and David. And so when you talk to different Rastas, they'll see that in different ways. You talk to some 12 tribes people, they'll say that's a reincarnation of Christ. Some other people say he's just a member of the family, you know, but he just happened to be the king. You know, but those are two things. And the other is Marcus Garvey. You have to recognise Marcus Garvey as a kind of modern day, although it was in the 1920s and 30s, modern day prophet. And those are the three things. You can ask any Rasta about those three things, and they will say yes. Then ask them if they're a vegan, you'll get all different answers. You can ask them if they believe in driving cars. Some Rastas don't believe in wearing shoes. You know, some Rastas think you should be in heels. There's some Rastas that hated Bob Marley because he put on jeans and everything, and they saw him as... No, sorry, I've got to take that back, because they criticised me for that. They didn't hate him. They criticised him and said he was selling out for kind of putting on this stuff and being a rock star, like, and even kind of putting a lot of jingles into reggae. You know, reggae was supposed to be roots, drum, bass, you know, and loads of things that make it radio friendly. But he's still a Rasta, you know, and so we can have that discussion within ourselves. But those are the three things that you'll find all Rastas have in common.
What pulled you into the Rasta culture? Was it initially Bob Marley, or was it or reggae itself, or just it was in Handsworth anyway?
I love Bob Marley, but I loved him as a poet. And I remember, this is a difficult thing for some people to understand, and but I liked Bob Marley when he wasn't really that popular within the black community.
Oh, you mean, was it later on? Or,
No,
earlier?
in the early days.
Oh, when he's culty,
Well,
yeah.
actually, when I say, let me take that back. When he wasn't really popular within the Rastafarian community, within the blues dance, you didn't really hear Bob Marley play that blues. That was drum and bass. That was Burning Spear, Pablo Moses. That was the real roots reggae, the dub. You know, and if you listen to anything that Bob Marley's done that's really dub, it's usually on his own label. He didn't do that stuff with Island, you know, and the Tough Gong label. Roots, Naughty Roots, those kind of tracks. which are not that radio friendly because they're really heavy on the bass. If you put them on like a transistor, you can hardly hear it because it's all bass, you know. So it wasn't just Bob Marley. I always admired him as a poet. I used to like listen to his words. Sometimes I'd write them down and just read them as a poem. For me, the attractive thing about Rastafarianism was that you could be political and spiritual at the same time. And I found that most people were either one thing or another. A lot of the political people around me said, oh, no, there's no spiritual aspect to me. You know, it's just Marxism and religion being the opium of the people and all that stuff. And a lot of people who are religious said, we don't deal with politics. You know? But Rastafarianism says, the interesting thing was, it didn't actually, he wouldn't say politics, you know. You interview Bob Marley and he said, I don't deal with politics, you know. But yet you look at the lyrics and it's so political.
Yeah.
Because we didn't really see it as politics. We see it as just talking about our reality.
Social politics.
Yeah, we're talking about the way we live. If you want to call it politics. But we're talking about the way we live. We're talking about the conditions we live in, the way we're policed. And of course, you know, if I had to go and talk about that in a lecture in university, it'd be under politics, you know. But we just called it our reality. And the idea that, first of all, there's the Jamaican context, but I'm going to talk about the British context. Here we are, as I said earlier, we can't walk some of the streets in Birmingham and London and Manchester because of the National Front or the police. We live in the worst houses and the council estates, etc., etc. You know the whole story. So I've got 5 minutes of a single. Used to be 3.5 minutes to do a single back in the day, right? Or whatever it is. I've got a 3-minute slot on television to do poetry or whatever. You think I'm going to go in there and talk about the daffodils? You know what I mean? I'm going to talk about our reality. You think I could do a poem about how beautiful the sunset is and then go back to Antwerp and say, you had 5 minutes on television to talk about how we're living. You talked about the bloody sunset. No, we had to represent ourselves, you know, and we were desperate. We were, you know.
Because it's one of the few voices that actually get heard.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there was very few black voices in the media. So when we had the opportunity to go and speak, we had to represent, you know, and it wasn't like, sometimes I get interviewed with people and they think I've chosen a career like Bob Dylan or something, you know. Did you choose to be a protest poet? I didn't choose to be a protest poet. Somebody's beat me up. Right, so Rothbury, you know.
Would you actually rather write about daffodils if you know you didn't have any of the problems that you had when you were growing up? Would it, or was it?
No, I'd rather. Well, daffodils are cool. I would probably like to write about veganism and sex. Yeah, those two things are really good. Yeah, and I can manage a bit of both.
Yeah, so
I'm going in a funny direction now, but you know what I mean. But no, I always said I would like to have been a comedian if I was really happy. If there's a heaven and we go there, or a hell, but whatever it is, and we live on, and we haven't got to deal with the politics of now, then I'd like to just make people happy, you know, and. Yeah, you can do that with sex and veganism too, but I'd like to be a comedian.
Veganism is very important for you. Isn't it? I mean, nowadays it's a big thing, and but you one of the first sort of people.
It's really amazing now when I look at it and see what's happening. I mean, vegan restaurants shooting up everywhere, and everybody wants to be vegan. It's again. I always feel so old when I talk about this, but back in the day, it was really difficult. I mean, I'm addicted to cake and sweets and stuff, and I think it's because I couldn't get them when I was young as a vegan. I remember I went vegetarian at 11 and vegan at 13.
How did you become vegetarian at 11? Because there was not many vegetarians around that time. There was not much information about it, was there?
I was having a conversation with my mother about where meat came from, and I just said, where did the meat come from, Mum? She said, it came from the shop. I said, where did the shopkeeper get it from? She said, it came from the farm. I said, where did the farmer get it from? She said, it came from the cow. I went, where did the cow get it from? And she said, it is the cow. And I was like, what? I'm eating the cow. I'm eating the cow. And I just stopped. And she thought it was a phase I was going through. And then I always say that I went vegan as a kind of feminist act. You know, every female on this planet produces milk for its own children. Yeah. It's as simple as that. So the idea of you going and taking, when a female has given birth, her milk is ready to feed her baby, then you take the baby away and take the milk yourself. You know, I don't know if you've ever heard a cow cry at that time. A cow will cry all night. Any animal would. You've been carrying a baby for so long, and then somebody just takes it away. She hasn't even had the joy of sex because somebody's artificially inseminated her. Then they come along and inseminate her again to keep her pregnant and keep her milking at the same time. I heard about that and I was like, what? And human beings are the only animals that drink milk after infancy. You can be really clever and say, well, cats do, but we only do it if we feed it to them. If they kind of, you know, naturally, after infancy, we grow our teeth and we get on, you know, eating other stuff. So anyway, I mean, there's all that stuff. And I didn't even say I went vegan. I just said I don't want anything from animals. The first day, man, the first day I heard the word vegan, I was walking down the street and there was a kid with an ice cream and he went, do you want a lick? And I went, no, because it's got animal products in it. And this other guy went, you're a vegan. And I jumped on him and I started hitting him. I thought it sounded like nigger or something. I've never heard the word before. And I started beating him and I held on me back. And he went, no, vegans are all right. Vegans is a good word. I'd never heard the word before.
So you actually got to this process by your own
Completely
path?
by my own.
Yeah,
I didn't know, there was no group, I knew nobody. I didn't know what the word vegetarian meant or veganism or anything like that. I just kind of went to it naturally. And I remember kind of coming to London and going to vegan fairs. They're really popular now. But you used to go there and it was like all these old hippies. And just like me, the only black guy there. And if I saw another black person across the hall, I'd go, I mean, we kind of gravitate to each other, you know. And
what are you doing here?
Yeah. Which is kind of ironic because, you know, there's really big communities in the Caribbean, in Africa, in Asia, of vegans. They don't even use the word vegan. You know, ITAL, there's loads of different words. There's tribes in Asia that are completely vegan. But when they were over here, they really didn't get involved in the vegan movement and they didn't use the word vegan and, you know.
Well,
so
why should they if they already had their own
Yeah.
thing
So,
going?
for them, it's just nothing. But, you know, I went to a vegan fair in Hammersmith a couple of years ago, and I was blown away. The range of people, young and old, Muslims, Buddhists, all kinds of people. I was just so pleased. I just thought we've arrived, you know. And there's a thing now which I can never pronounce: intersectionalism. It's like connecting it all. Veganism, because I couldn't understand why a lot of people that were into animal rights weren't into human rights. And why a lot of people that were into human rights weren't into animal rights. And I saw the connection with all of them, you know? And so, I mean, the class of people that like fox hunting are the same class of people that used to have slaves and would let a slave go and say, right, we're going to chase you. And if you're free, you're free. And then we're going to... Just like a fox, they used to do that to us. So I saw the connection years ago. And it was really frustrating sometimes because... I used to hang out with people, you know, kind of hunt saboteurs and things like that, and they were just, I mean, dedicated, but dedicated in one way. And I was always trying to get them to kind of see other struggles as well and connect them. And it's really good seeing that it's happening now. You get these people, academics that do lectures on veganism and connecting it to slavery and connecting it to capitalism and all this kind of stuff, and environmentalism, you know. It's great, and a lot of people are interviewing me saying, you know, do you think they're hypocritical? Do you think it's just trendy? Some of it may be, but actually a lot of it will stick, and I think a lot of people really care. And a lot of
Doesn't
people
matter if it's
really
trendy. If it's one cow saved, even if the reason's stupid, it's a...
Yeah. I mean, I used to get like letters in the days when we used to get letters before emails. It used to be mainly letters from usually young people, sometimes children even, but usually young people, and it would say, I read your poem or I heard you speak and I want to be a vegan, I'm going vegan now because of you. And I would write back and say, no, don't be a vegan because of me. Be a vegan because you want to be vegan. Because, you know, don't put me up on a pedestal. What happens if I slip? What happens if I do something wrong you don't like? Or, you know, find why you like veganism. I don't want somebody to say to you, oh, you're a vegan, tell me about it. And you go, well, I'm a vegan because Benjamin Zephaniah, I really like him and I'm following him. No, I want you to be able to, you know, reason, give your own reason.
You prefer to suggest the idea,
yes,
and then they follow their own path.
I want the world to be vegan, but I want them to understand. I want people to understand why it's important, not just do it because it's, you know, because Prince is vegan or Benjamin Zephaniah or whoever it is. You know.
I think it's important that people in the public eye suggest the ideas. I think
Yes,
that's,
yeah.
But you're right. Yeah, if following somebody's not.
Yeah. You know, it would any time that happened, nobody went back and went, well, I'm going to start eating meat. It just made them study, you know what I mean? And they would write another letter and they say, oh, yes, I can, you know, I want them to feel it, because what happens if they don't really feel it is that they go, oh, I'm tempted by the bacon. You know what I mean? But when I smell bacon, I smell death. You know, I've been in Lebanon one night and I came across, during the war there, the Civil War, a pile of dead bodies burning. So when I smell meat, I smell meat.
Same smell.
Yes,
yeah.
same smell.
Yeah.
That's not intellectual for me, that's emotional, you know, I feel it. And when I look into an animal's eyes, I see life. When I hear an animal cry, you know, for whatever reason, I want to cry with it. Call me mad, but I can watch an ant walking and just go, what is he thinking? And then I want to politically correct myself. Is it a he or a she? Are they coming from home or going home? I mean, it's something, I love jogging. And people ask me, you know, how much can you do? What's your time over the whatever kilometre? I don't know. Because if I'm jogging and I see a rabbit, I'll stop and talk to it. You know what I mean? I'll just look at the birds and go, wow. And I do it with people as well.
Were you like this as a child as well?
Always like it as a child.
Were you a sensitive child?
Well, my brothers and sisters would say no.
It's quite interesting. It's kind of like an interesting sort of dichotomy here, because you went through your naughty phase, you were in prison, and there is, you know, like when someone said vegan, you thought they said nigger, and you're going to hit them. So there's that side of you. There's also an incredible sensitivity as well. And I'm quite interested in that kind of schism, or is it the same thing really?
I was doing a thing a couple of years ago. It's an audience with Benjamin Zephaniah, you know, an audience. I'd do a few poems and take questions from the audience. And I was talking about veganism. I was saying that, you know, I care about every living thing, and if I can avoid killing something, I'll avoid it. And then there was a girl at the back, I think she was about 16, she put her hand up and said, what about mosquitoes? I reserve the right to self-defence.
Oh, do you not get a glass and try and catch them?
I have got a great thing, which I get out of this catalogue. I don't know how to describe it. It's like a triangle thing. It's glass, and it's got a little door on it, and it's on a stick. So if you see a spider or something, you can just collect it.
Oh, they've actually made a kit.
Yeah. It's really, I've got one in every room.
Yeah.
Every room in my house. But most of the time, I'll just leave them. You know, who are we? We came here when all these animals were here, right? We kicked them out, and we made these buildings, and then we bring a cat in. Bring a cat in and bring a dog. You know, I mean, they were here before us. You know, and that's why I think there's a really big difference between an animal lover and a pet lover. You know, people can love pets and, you know, just hate other animals. You know, so you've got to be an animal lover. And so, but, you know, going back to your question, no, I was a fighter. I was a scrapper. You know, I defended myself. We had to. It was survival.
Yeah, but behind that, you know, street life is one thing, and you have to stand your ground. You're not actively looking for trouble. You're just, it's protection, or maybe you were. I don't know.
I'm going to tell you a story again. Sorry, it's going to sound like I'm plugging a book, but I've written about this recently, and I've been going through my life recently because of this autobiography I'm writing. But there's a story in there where I kind of recall. This may sound horrible, but I've got to be honest and tell you the truth. Some of my friends went queer bashing, it used to be called then, going out and beating gay people up. And they got this guy, and they were kicking him, and I'm standing there, you know? And I'll never forget thinking, first of all, we don't even know if he's gay, so what if he is? We didn't use the word gay then, actually, you know, it was queer. I didn't know if he was queer, and so what if he is? He hasn't done anything to any of us. And I'm thinking there, and they're all laying into him. And they went, Benjamin, man, kick the boy, kick him. And it just so happened that the guy was looking up at me. And I just thought, if I don't kick him, they're going to call me queer. You know, they're going to say you like him or something. If I do kick him, I'm going completely against my instinct. And I kind of just did a tap like that. And I could see he looked at me as if to say thank you with his eyes, like I didn't kick him. But it was like a compromise in a way. It was like to staying with the boys, but also I know I shouldn't be doing this.
Now in the same situation, you'd have a very different reaction, wouldn't you? Yeah.
I wouldn't be there.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
or if you pass a scene like that or something.
No, I'd go in there.
Yeah.
You know, but fair, you know, you're with the guys, and it's the crowd mentality and everything. But I'll never forget it, and I'll never forget him looking at me. I'd love to meet him now because there was something between us that and I could see him thinking he didn't kick me, he didn't kick me. But I kind of had to do a kind of token kick for my credibility.
And does that make you feel angry now? That pack mentality, because you're a very individualistic person, aren't you?
Yes, yeah. No. Things started to go right for me when I started to think for myself and didn't follow the pack. I can remember getting a gang of people, and I wanted to make a group of poets, right? So you'd have a lead poet, and then when I'd be doing the main line, people would be coming in with me and joining in and doing a verse here and a verse there. And I hired a rehearsal room, and I paid for it in advance, 6 weeks. We did the first week, and on the second week, we did the second week as well, and on the third week, I arrived, and all the guys were standing outside the place going, we don't want to do this. I said, what's the problem with it? Said, poetry. Stupid, man. Let's get a reggae band, man, and we can get some girls that way. Everybody loves reggae now. And I was like, no, we want to be different. And it's like, it will never take off, and then look what happened to rap. You know what I mean? It's just like, and I actually met one of those guys the other day, and he was like really upset. He was saying, Benjamin, you forgot us now, you're a superstar, this and the other. And I was like, hey, bro, do you remember that time?
Yeah, you could have come.
You could have come with me,
Yeah. Do you think poetry actually saved you in a way?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, you could have actually just been stuck in Birmingham in these kind of gangs. I mean, these guys hang around all their lives in these kind of enclosed ideas and mindsets, but poetry's your escape route.
You know, it sounds a little bit like a cliche, but it's true. You know, it's just like sometimes music or boxing or something like that say people. It's true.
But to even more depth, I mean, boxing's a great, like it's an art really in a sense, but there's so much more levels on reggae as well, isn't there? So much more sensitivity levels, more doors can open up. Yeah,
and I guess if you want longevity, you can arrive and just come on the scene and bang, have some success. But if you want longevity, then you've got to start thinking outside the box. You've got to put some intelligence into your music and stuff like that. That's why steel pulse are still around.
You've got to be good at it as well. Yeah.
You get better. Hey, listen, I know loads of punk bands and reggae bands from the 70s and 80s. When they started, they hardly could play an instrument. They learned on the job, but they had a lot of passion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They had fire in their bellies. And
Which is always great to watch.
Yeah. I mean, I knew people that played in the band, played bass. To this day, actually, I still know some reggae artists that can play reggae in their band, put them with another band or something, or tell them to play something else. They can't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But they've just,
They perfected their own art. Though.
Yes,
I mean, I suppose the types of poetry you won't be able to do other type people's poetry. You just perfect and hone down your own creativity. Or do you find that you can actually take you as a person, as a thing, and put it in different places? Like you acting, don't you? So
yeah. And also, look at the collaborations I've done. I did one with Kenobi and Sinead O'Connor, and I did something called Tamlin recently with Imagine Village, and that's not reggae, I had a massive #1 hit with a track with an Italian woman who was like the Italian version of Susie Quattro. You know what I mean? I just happened to be in a house one night. She had a recording studio, and we went and recorded something, and I just did a bit of poetry.
Was this a big hit in Yugoslavia or somewhere?
No, that was something else. That wasn't
Yeah.
my album. That was my album.
Yeah, yeah.
But and then I got a couple of months later, I got a call from her. We are #1. Can you come and make a video? I couldn't even bloody go and make a video. I was busy. So, but and she was like, I can't even remember her name now, but she was really big, and it's completely rock. It was pop rock, and I like doing that. But actually, when I start to write, on the whole, I've got a kind of reggae beat going on.
Is that in your head, or do you actually physically play the reggae in the background?
No, it's just in my head. I do play bass, but reggae is my roots really.
But you can actually transpose you as a personality, as a thing, into other places.
Oh yeah, I do. I do acting.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm a professor now.
Yeah.
I'm a doctor 16 times over, and I'm a professor twice over. I'm a professor in one university and visiting professor at another. And so I've become a teacher, which is really odd, because I left school at 13.
Well, that's more of an indictment to the education system, really.
Yeah. At the start of every term, I tell my students, all of you in here are more educated on paper than me. All of you, without a doubt.
Yeah.
But what I have is experience. And as you know, I've been doing some acting. I've curated exhibitions.
See, in a way, it's a hideous word, but you become a brand, you become a thing, don't you? And people know that you're culturally aware enough to make anything that's thrown at you, you can make it happen, you can make it work, can't you?
I'm not sure about anything, but lots
you
of
try
things.
it, though, you're not scared of it.
I'm just trying to think what I wouldn't do.
Rob a car now, I suppose.
I went to rob something the other day. I was in a shop. I went to steal something. I just thought it was just too bloody expensive. And this company, anyway, this particular company that I was going to rob from, they don't care about the environment. They don't care about nothing. And I bought one, and I was going to rob the other one. And I just saw the newspaper headlines,
Yeah,
I just saw.
Try to explain the subtleties of that.
Yeah.
Because it is a case of who's robbing who, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I just went, no, I'm going to pay for it.
Would it be a similar kind of newspaper headlines as the OBE, turn down the OBE?
Would you let this man near your daughter?
Did you get a lot of heat for that?
A lot of people, a lot of mainly women, wrote to me and said, yeah, you can have my daughter. But that was a Sun news headline.
Because a lot of people turned down OBs. It wasn't. It's not. David Bowie turned down an MBE or an OB, but he didn't get the same kind of heat, did he?
Actually, I got to go back. I got to tell you something. Sorry, I've just made a bit of a mistake. That headline was from in the 80s when Trinity College offered me a post. So that's where would you let this man near your daughter? So my apologies, I got that wrong. But yeah, the turning down the OBE was, I don't get why I was offered it. If you look at, my last book of poetry, I haven't done one for a long time. The first poem in it is a critique of people that accept these gongs.
So you obviously hadn't read that one.
Yeah. And forget that poem. You would know that a lot of what I speak about is against the idea of empire and people ruling people. It's about meritocracy, if you like. It's about. I've always said I'm not against the royal family. My mum thinks she's the Queen of Birmingham. I know loads of kings and queens in Africa and the Caribbean. It's the institution of the monarchy that we've got to. I see as my
not the people, but the actual
they can't help who they're born.
Yeah.
But it's the institution, the privilege, and all that kind of stuff. So to give me an award with that in my title, to me it's like saying, the Club of Slavery or something. It's ridiculous.
And it's nonsensical because there isn't actually an empire.
It's not an empire.
Would you take if it was called a Citizens' Medal?
I would take it if it came from my peers. I wouldn't take it if it came from the state or the monarchy.
So it's actually.
I'm telling you now, I still want to overthrow the state. I'm an anarchist.
And your way.
I might be an anarchist with nice shoes or whatever, but I believe that we would get on better without government if we took responsibility for ourselves. It's difficult for us to imagine because for so long we've got into this pattern of people doing it for us. We delegate kind of the duties of organising our cities and countries to these people. We delegate our spirituality to these priests and people. We've lost the kind of idea that we can do it for ourselves. You know, I don't know if you want to call it God or whatever. I believe there is something spiritual going on, and you don't need a Bible.
You can define it any way you want.
Sit quietly with yourself. Just sit quietly with yourself and deal with your own conscience. And when you get quiet enough, you will hear the wind around you. You'll hear the wind going past your ears. You'll hear your heart. You'll hear your blood, and then you'll get in touch with yourself. Call it meditating, whatever you want. And then you don't have this. It's not a God up there and all that stuff. You will see, you'll feel that you are related to the trees because they're breathing like you. Again, I said earlier, it's something that you can't really talk about, you have to experience. So I believe that we can get back to that. That's before religion, you know, that's before, we were doing that a long time ago. We can do that again. In the same way we can run our lives again. We can organise ourselves again. When Grenfell Tower burnt, the government left us. The government left the people organised themselves. That was anarchy. You know, because people are brainwashed, they think anarchy now is just kind of rioting or something. So if I was to accept something from the government now, well, no, I wouldn't, you know. I just wouldn't. Nothing from state, nothing from church, nothing from the hypocrites. From the people, from educational institutions, I have a soft spot for them. You know, the reason why, when I took my first doctorate, I remember going into a youth club in East London, and somebody introduced me as Dr. Benjamin Zephaniah, and I kind of went, oh, you don't have to say that, you know. I'm not like John Cooper Clarke. He has to be doctor. I go, it's all right. Good old John.
He's kind of tongue-in-cheeky.
I know, I love him. But some guy went, and remember, these are guys that, you know, they're either been in trouble with the police or they're having problems. It's one of these kind of youth centres where they go to keep them off the street and everything. And so as I sat down, one kid said, why did he call you doctor? And I explained that I've been given an honorary doctorate from a university. And I said to him, my biggest kick is like having it in my licence. When the police stop me, I make them call me doctor. And they were like, wow, wow. And this kid is like into rap. He said, I can do it. I said, yeah. I said, okay, you know, you messed up at school, so did I. But actually, if you work at your craft, you can get recognition from people. And you could become a doctor and you could become a professor. And they were like, wow.
So it's an empowering thing.
Yeah, they feel like, okay, this is not exactly just me obeying Babylon, and you know what I mean by that, right? It's me taking my own route and getting recognition on my own terms. So that's why I kind of respect education, you know. And I get lots of people that come to me. And again, I don't want to stereotype too much, but this is the truth. They tend to be white middle-class people that go, I'm so great that you got so far in life without education. You know, you did it so well. Oh, it's so wonderful. And I say to them, okay, take your kids out of school.
Yeah.
No, if it's so cool, take your kids out of school and let them get beat up by the police and racists and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And let that be their education. No
so in a way you made it despite everything.
Yeah. And sometimes there is a problem sometimes in that, you know, I wrote a book called Gangster Rap, which is about a group of kids who get excluded from school, but they make it through rap. And there has been some kids that have said, well, I am not going to get an education because if Benjamin Zephaniah can do it, I can do it, you know. And I'll say to them, no, I'm one that made it and got through, but there's lots of people that didn't. You know, I went to visit Brixton Prison the other day to do a talk in there, and when I was in there, I saw a kid in there who went to prison with me in 76 or something.
And he's still on that loop.
He's still on that loop. You know, and we can almost identify a day when he went one way and I went another. You know.
So these days, when you sort of articulate what you think and what you feel about the world, it's not so much with poetry, is it? It's like multidiscipline. You talk a lot, you do lectures, you go to prison and do talks.
Yeah, novels.
So you found a way that poetry is a great way of articulating things at one point in time, but now you found a way of just putting it into lots of different fields.
I always think I'm just about getting away with everything else, right? Seriously, if I do a lecture or whatever, I've got away with that. If I do anything, a novel even, every time I write a novel, I think, that's it. I've got no more in me. Even talking like this, I find it slightly difficult. Because if me and you were talking normally, when we were walking over there, when we met, we hugged, you know, we just kind of walked, it was kind of different. But, you know, as soon as we start talking formally, there's a way of doing it, you know. And I think, when I'm on stage, my mum will say, that's my boy.
Okay, you find the stage the most
when I'm on
natural place.
stage doing my poetry, that's me.
So it's a stage plus the poetry.
Yeah, stage doing my poetry, yeah. Even if I'm on with my band, I think that's a little bit of an act because we've kind of rehearsed it and there's stuff going on. But when I'm on my own, I can be rude, I can be outrageous, I can be sensitive, I can ad-lib. You know, I really feel at home. You know, some people get nervous before they go on stage. I don't. Let me get on there. I don't know if you've ever seen backstage sometimes when the order's up to you and people go, no, you go on first, you go on.
Oh, yeah.
I go, no, let me go on. You know, and if I come off and they don't want to go on, I can't go back on again, you know what I mean? I'll do it all night because that's when I'm at home. I remember once somebody introduced me as the next act and I almost hit him. I got so angry. I said, this is not an act. This is the real thing. When I come off stage and have to act normal, that's acting for me. When I'm on stage, this is me. The rest of it is a kind of act. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Benjamin.
I love you, man.
All right.
Cool. Really nice talking.